Welcome to the Kriya Yoga Podcast, a source of inspiration and actionable education for those inspired towards the goal of enlightenment through yogic meditation. Through these interviews, discussions, and reflections, it is my intention to share the possibility of waking up to the reality of self and God realization, and to remind you of the immortal words of Paramahansa Yogananda. Don't look back. Don't look to the left or to the right. Look straight ahead to the goal and go all the way in this lifetime. I'm Kurczak, and I'll be your host on this adventure of spiritual self-discovery. Welcome back, everyone, to the Kriya Yoga Podcast. Today, our guest is Roy Thibodeau, and you might remember him from episode 7 of season 1 of the Kriya Yoga Podcast, which was released December 9th of 2019. So if you've missed that episode, I'd recommend you go back and listen to it. Mr. Thibodeau is a student of Yogacharya Oliver Black, one of the leading disciples of Paramahansa Yogananda. And Roy met Mr. Black in 1972 and has been practicing Kriya Yoga since then. Both he and his wife have offered Hatha Yoga classes and meditation classes for decades in conjunction with Song of the Morning Ranch, a Kriya Yoga retreat center. So today we're going to catch up with Roy and talk about a very rare book of letters that were sent between Mr. Black and Paramahansa Yogananda. Roy, welcome. It's good to have you back.
I'm glad to be back, Ryan.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. It's been, almost 5 years?
It is hard to believe, isn't it? Seems like we live many lifetimes in one.
Oh, absolutely. I can totally agree with that. So today we're going to talk about this book that is a series of letters between Oliver Black and Paramahansa Yogananda. Can you tell us what the title of that book is and what it's about?
The title is My Dear Oliver. We published it at Golden Lotus at Song of the Morning Ranch, published it with Self-Realization Fellowship's permission. And it's a series of letters from 1942 until 1951 from Yogananda to Yogacharya. Unfortunately, we don't have the letters that he sent back. We just have the letters from Yogananda. Apparently, my understanding is Self-Realization Fellowship has the letters from Yogananda to Yogacharya and also from Yogacharya back. Apparently they saved them. But that's their property, and they weren't willing to give that to us for this book. Apparently they plan on, they tell us, making a book about many of Yogananda's close disciples. Yeah. And they would include some of that in there if they ever get around to it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they've got their hands full.
They do. They sure do.
So this book are the letters from Yogananda to Mr. Black, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
And I suppose before we get too much into some of the highlights of what's in those letters, would you mind taking a moment and just telling us a little bit about Mr. Black, Oliver Black, and his relationship to Yogananda?
Certainly. He was born in a small town in Ohio in September 1st of 1893. It's an interesting fact that Yogacharya, James Lynn, Dr. Lewis, and Yogananda were all born within 14 months of each other. Yeah. You'll notice Yogananda was born also in 1893. So you can see kind of a group of souls that came back together for this work, with 3 of them born in the United States. Yogacharya, then his family moved to Indiana, and they were pretty poor people. And so he had a real poor upbringing. And when he left home, he moved to Rockford, Illinois, and he worked for a carriage maker. And that was kind of at the beginning of the automotive industry,
right,
in the United States, in Detroit. And so he saw an opportunity and he moved to Detroit. And he worked for a carriages and automobiles have a lot of similarities. So he worked in the automotive industry, and eventually, not sure exactly the year, he started his own business, which became very successful. It was called Peninsular Metal Products.
Uh-huh.
But he was married. He had two children, a son and a daughter, Robert and Phyllis. His wife's name was Ethel. And he didn't meet Yogananda until he never really was. It's funny how he would be sometimes. He never really specifically said the year, but he said he met him just before he was 40. Okay. So it had to be 32 or 33, 1932 or 33.
Right.
And it's an interesting story, actually, how they met. Yogacharya had actually met a yogi before Yogananda named Rishi Grewal, who was from India. And Yogacharya was, because of his past life's history, was interested in these things. And so he went to meet him when he went through Detroit. He was mostly a Hatha yogi at the time, and he was going to teach Hatha yoga in Detroit. So Mr. Black went and met him. He did him a favor in helping him with his classes. And the Rishi Grewal always remembered that. And he had a ashram in Santa Barbara, California. And he kind of was like a traditional yogi in the Himalayas. He lived in a cave in Santa Barbara. And he had some yogic powers, and he actually taught Yogacharya how to find minerals under the ground. And he used that he was able to find oil in the ground. Wow. And he was never really very able to use it for himself, but he did help James Lynn. James Lynn was already fairly wealthy through his insurance empire, but he was good friends with James Lynn Rajasi, and he got a oil derrick, and he followed him around, and Yogacharya would tell him where to drill, and he would drill and hit these oil wells. And of course, part of that is used to fund SRF even today.
Right.
But then in 32 or probably 33, Yogananda happened to be in Washington, D.C. on the East Coast, and he was on his way to go back to California. And he was getting ready to get on the airplane to fly back, and the flight would have probably took him through Indianapolis, probably, Yogacharya said. But Divine Mother, as Yogananda always referred to his intuition and her voice, told him to go to Detroit. So he changed his plans and he flew to Detroit. And when he got to Detroit, he didn't know why he was there. So he found a phone book, of all things, and he started running his finger down the phone book through the names. And then his finger stopped at this point, and it was this woman's name. Her name was Maud Emerson. And he didn't know her, but he called her. And when he got her on the phone, he introduced himself, and she said, "Oh, that's interesting. I have a fellow that teaches yoga and philosophy in my home." And Yogananda says, "Well, I need to meet that man." And it turned out to be Mr. Black.
Wow. Well, I don't remember hearing that before. Maybe you told that story already, but still that hits me. That hits me in a way. That's amazing.
And then he spent I was never clear, because sometimes, he was maybe changed his story just a little bit, whether Yogananda stayed for a week or 2 weeks, and he stayed in the Book Cadillac Hotel, which was one of the nicest hotels in America at the time.
Right.
And they spent nearly 2 full weeks together. And he said he taught him about meditation. He gave him Kriya initiation. He taught him many healing ways to heal people and that kind of thing.
Wow.
And then he went back to California, and that's when they started their relationship.
Right.
But now these letters in the book don't start until 1942, I think, or 41.
Okay.
I don't know if there were letters in between that time or not. We don't have them if there were.
Right. Right. Wow. Yeah. You may have told that story before in the previous podcast, but I didn't remember it. And that's that's just amazing. Just going down through the book and finding a name and then having that kind of connection. And then, Mr. Black goes on to create the Song of the Moraine Ranch, correct?
Yeah, he didn't do that until 1970.
Oh, okay. Okay.
When Yogananda passed on 52, I think, he was a center leader in Detroit, and he'd made him a minister and authorized him to give Kriya initiation. And Yogacharya went through a few places, but for the most of that time, he held the services in the Detroit Institute of Arts,
Okay.
which is a big museum in Detroit. And he had it in what they call lecture hall, which is like a small auditorium with about 200 seats.
Mm-hmm.
And then about in 1969, they expanded to the main auditorium, which holds several hundred. And he used to get 300 to 500 people every Sunday at his meditations.
Yeah.
And beforehand, he would have a Hatha yoga class, and he would have a Kriya review class and a lessons class.
Right.
And then later after the service, they would go down and they would have he called it their fellowship time, where they might have coffee and tea and snacks, and they would, there'd be a social time. And then as time went on, he would speak more informally about spiritual things.
Right.
And we have a lot of those recorded because we had a woman who was a freelance writer for the Detroit Free Press, and she would record them on a cassette recorder. We're trying to clean them up right now. I'm involved in that project to make them more easier to listen to. Because in the originals, there's a lot of background noise. There's a lot of people clanking spoons and forks against the cups and saucers, and even Yogacharya, she would put a cassette recorder in the middle of the table in front of him, and sometimes he'd turn his head to speak to someone else, and it'd be hard to hear him.
Right. Well, that's wonderful too. I mean, so this is something that's in that you're currently working on, a project you're currently working on.
We have 7 of them done. We have about 100 of hours, actually.
Yeah.
We have about 7 cleaned up. What we do is about 3 times a year now. The next one we're going to do is at Christmas time. We have a gathering of people and we unveil it up at the retreat. We haven't made any available to the general public yet, but that's in the works. We're kind of waiting for the right time for that.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I want to keep my eyes open for that because it's hard to find recordings of. It's just hard to find recordings of things like that, and I think it's really wonderful to have those in the world and have them accessible to people. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, it is pretty common now because we have all these phones and everything.
Right.
Like you can do your podcasts and all that.
Yeah.
But back in Yogananda's era, and then later in Yogacharya's, it was pretty rare,
Yeah.
We didn't really have cassette recorders until the mid 60s.
Yeah.
Hard to believe, but that's what it was.
Yeah. Well, we'll have another discussion when some of those are available because I think we need to let people know about that too. But in the meantime, let's talk about this book. Okay. So you told me about it in an email and I got super excited and I went looking for it and I found out I can't find it anywhere.
When we talked, I might have thought there were some more available, but
that's okay.
Yogacharya was always one of their ministers till the day he died, SRF, and he never really wanted to destroy that relationship. And so we take the same tact with the retreat.
Right.
Some of us on our own personal lives is different, but with the retreat, they're trying to keep that relationship. And so they asked SRS permission to publish this.
Yeah.
And their stance is those letters, because he was a minister of SRF, those letters actually they feel are their property.
Right.
And so, but they gave us the ability to publish a limited edition. So we published 250, and of course we sold them all out almost immediately.
Right.
And they've kept a few in reserve for posterity, but not enough that they're willing to sell anymore.
Yeah.
Now, we haven't decided yet, but they may ask to see if they can publish more, but we don't have that done yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
They are quite interesting, though. Maybe
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see this or not. They did a nice job with the book. The front cover is this picture with Yogananda and Yogacharya. And it just so we don't have many pictures with Yogananda.
Right.
SRF has more, but we don't have them.
Mm-hmm.
And that picture actually is part of a bigger picture. I don't know if you can see this.
There
with,
you go. Yeah.
Yogananda, Yogacharya, Rajasi, and Dr. Lewis.
Uh-huh.
And we just crop it, so we just have Yogananda and Mr. Black in it.
Yeah. So as you were going through that, or when you were going through the letters, was there anything in particular that stuck out to you that you weren't expecting?
No, I've been around him enough that I wasn't unexpected. It was just reaffirming, I would say, for me.
Right.
For others, we did a book study on Zoom. We just finished it, and this last year we did it on this book, and it was interesting. And I didn't attend all of them because it came at a bad time on the day for me. But those that I was available, I attend, and we would have a group of maybe 15 or so, 20 sometimes. And of the group, there were only 4 of us that actually knew Yogacharya.
Right.
Because at this point in time, he's been gone since 1989. And so most of the people, even at the retreat these days, have never met him. They just heard about him through stories from us. So they were kind of surprised, I would say, pleasantly surprised by some of the letters.
Yeah.
But we know how devotional Yogananda was. So a lot of that is expressed in his letters.
Yeah.
Would you like me to read one of them, maybe?
Oh, absolutely.
Couple?
Yeah.
Well, this one's pretty short. This is the very first one we have, December 9th, 1949. So it's almost the end of the year. And he says, "Dear one, I have just received your letter written December 4th. And I am overjoyed to learn that you are coming here in January. I understand about you being unable to be with us for the Christmas holidays. On January 4th, we're having the 4th birthday celebration of the opening of the Golden Lotus Temple in Encinitas, which, by the way, is no longer there, fell into the ocean. I wonder if it will be possible for you to be here in time for this occasion. After the Sunday service in the temple, we are having a banquet of Hindu and American dishes. I believe you would enjoy this very much, and I would so love to have you. Please let me know when you will arrive in Los Angeles, and we will meet you at the station. Until we meet, accept my deepest blessings and good wishes for the holiday. Very sincerely yours, Paramahansa Yogananda." And in almost every letter, they're typewritten.
Oh, okay.
And then they're a little bit hard to read, and they on a SRF fellowship stationery. Right. And that letterhead has changed over time too. but he always hand writes a PS in every letter. Sometimes PS, PPS. He like he can't stop himself, and he'll scribble on the side of the letter.
Yeah.
That took a real dedication for the people that put this together, because some of his handwriting is nearly impossible to read.
Right.
So his PS says, please keep a balance between meditation and activity. Let both work harmoniously. I'm waiting to see you here. In unending love and blessings again, PY.
So that was December 9th, 1949.
Yeah.
Well, if he would have been there.
In his letters, of course, we don't know what Yogacharya wrote to him, but in his letters, he's always trying to get Mr. Black to come out to Los Angeles more often than he does.
Yeah.
He talks about how he misses him and he wish he would come more often. Yogacharya was a fairly wealthy businessman, not as wealthy as Rajasi, but pretty wealthy in his own right.
Yeah.
And so he would often send him a donation, and Yogananda would thank him profusely for it. And of course, he lived in Detroit. There's some of the letters in here. I don't know what year, some in the 40s, that they were trying to get a car. The car they had wasn't working, and they needed a new car. So it's after Yogacharya because he's in the automotive industry. Finally, Yogacharya got him a car out there. He was so happy, and he didn't. And SRF didn't have to pay for it.
That's good.
There was a sad time too. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but Yogacharya's son died during World War II in Europe.
Mm.
He was in the Air Force, and he got shot down behind enemy lines. And I don't believe they ever found his body, but of course they knew he was dead. And Yogananda's, in 2 or 3 of his letters, expresses his sympathy and how difficult it must be for him to go through that. See if I can find one, maybe.
Yeah. If he would have been there in 1949 for Christmas, he would have maybe met Mr. Davis, because that's when Mr. Davis met Yogananda.
Well, he knew Roy, of course. But he had to. It was interesting because I loved Roy. I'm sure, like you do.
Mm-hmm.
And right at the end of Yogacharya's life, he told Roy he could come to see him at the ranch. And Roy stopped in the Detroit area on his way up and did some sort of workshop at a Unity church in the area. And while he was there, he got a phone call from someone I know, Irmgard Kurtz, who was kind of like Yogacharya's right-hand woman, that Yogacharya had passed.
Oh, no.
So he didn't get to visit with him.
Yeah.
But he did come up for the memorial service. And of course, SRF sent out a nun also. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, I read the eulogies from both Roy and from the nun, and Roy's was much more expressive and much more complimentary than the SRF's nun.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Black was Roy's older brother disciple. So if he was born in 93, there was quite an age difference there.
Yeah. Well, he would be like, he was Yogananda's age.
Yeah. Right.
So he wasn't his guru, but, he was like an uncle.
Absolutely.
That's what I said to Roy. I laughed when he ordained me. He asked me, I said, if he would ordain me under one condition. And he said, well, what would that be? And I said, well, that you ordain me under Yogacharya Oliver's authority. And he kind of pulled back for a second. He said, well, of course, I wouldn't consider any other way. And when I would call him on the phone, and and we would talk and laugh and have a conversation. And I told him, I said, you know, you're like you're not my guru, but you're like my spiritual uncle.
Right.
And he would laugh. He was so gracious, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah,
He was the best to me.
yeah, that's how I feel. Of course, I had a little of that with Roy too.
Yeah.
But, you know, Yogacharya was my guru, so that's kind of a special thing. But Roy Davis was pretty special to me too.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
You know, the last time I saw him was down there with Marianne, and I took one of our students, and he gave out of his heart. He gave us, you know, he had these little ivory-like statues of the gurus.
Right.
He gave Marianne and I a set that we still have in our meditation room.
Do you remember when that was? Do you remember what year that might have been?
I think it was about 2 years before he passed.
Okay.
So when he was 22, is that when he died?
He passed in 2019, so maybe it would have been 2017 or 16.
Yeah, yeah. I could look it up. I have it.
Yeah,
it was around that time.
Yeah.
And again, he was just so gracious. It was the first time. Can I tell you a little story?
Yeah, absolutely.
About Roy? I know we're talking about this, but the first time we went there was in 2009 or 10. And I'd known about Roy almost since I met Yogacharya. And I had a lot of his books, not all of them, but I had some of them. And I said to my wife, I said, you know, I'd like to meet Roy Davis. Let's go down. And so we made arrangements. We drove down there, and he put us in one of the little houses that they have there.
Mm-hmm.
We went on the far end, down by past where the library is,
right
farther down, right at the end. And so we were there. We got there after 5 o'clock the night we arrived. So everyone on the staff was gone, but they left the key out for us and a note where to go. So we went up and we spent the night, and we were up and, you know, finished our meditation and stuff. And we get a knock on the door. And we open the door, and there's Roy's there.
Oh, wow.
And he says, are you awake? Do you mind if I come in? I said, oh, no, that'd be great.
Yeah.
He spent at least an hour, maybe longer with us. And we just talked. And, you know, I had some things that I gave him from Yogacharya, and he gave me a number of his books. And then we didn't see him the rest of the day, and we explored and we went around the area because it's a beautiful area. And then the next morning, the same thing happened. He comes 8 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, wow.
The door, he comes in. So we talked again. It was fabulous, really.
Yeah. Yeah. He always was an early riser and ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
he's so gracious. He's such a great soul, really.
Yeah. Well, I know, I mean, clearly he thought very highly of Mr. Black. You know, he had a picture of Mr. Black up in the meditation hall. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
It was the only picture he had, other than he had someone from Japan that he liked. I forget his name. And he had a picture of Daimata too, I think.
Right. Do you remember, I mean, maybe I'm remembering this wrong, but I remember being at CSA and I remember watching a video of Oliver Black. Do you remember, like, is that a possibility?
Oh yeah, there was a period in the 1985 and 86 where he had a lot of followers that would come up there, and they decided they would do these satsangas.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1985, they did a series of 6 where we have a meditation area, we call it the lodge, and he would sit in a chair, and you couldn't see the audience, but you could hear them, and they would ask questions. Actually, the way they did it, they wrote it down, somewhat like Roy used to do.
Yeah.
He put them in a basket and he'd answer them, and somebody wouldn't answer.
Right.
But we did a series of 6 of those in 85, and each one was between 45 minutes and an hour long. And then it was like from January through June. And of course, the summer months up there are the most busy with guests and things. So then in 1986, what they did is the fellow who recorded them with his video decided they would spend some money and get a better one.
Mm.
So they went from a 8mm to a 16mm, and they recorded another 6 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And we still have them. We used to sell them up there, and they were at like VHS,
Right.
So I got the equipment and I digitized them all. So now they're in a MP4 format.
Right.
And I sell some on my website. They're doing so much with the editing software now that I think we can clean them up a bit.
Yeah.
Because the first set in 85, they're not as good a quality, so that jumps a little bit and the colors are a little bit off. So I think we could fix that up. But we have 12 or 13 of them.
So those are available now, or they're going to be in the works?
I have them available on my website. I don't publicize it to my friends too much because they probably wouldn't like it.
Okay.
But if you go on my website, you can order them. Actually, I have a little store there.
And remind me what your website is. It Golden Lotus?
No, mine is yogacharyaoliver.com.
That's right. Yogacharyaoliver.com.
There's a store, and I just redid it because they changed the software. I go through GoDaddy, and they made it so I could make them available. You can download them as soon as you purchase them. You can download them, the MP4.
Right.
If you're going to do it, though, there's, like I said, I think there's 12 or 13. If you do the later ones, the 1986 ones, they're a little better quality. And many of them they're not completely duplicates, but he tells the same stories throughout,
Right. Well, Mr. Davis was the same way. I mean, whenever I would go on retreat there multiple times a year, I would often be able to anticipate what the story was that was about to come up. But actually, that's okay.
As a follower, it's almost comforting.
It is. And, my sense was always there's something in the story that I might have not gotten the first time, or it just allows me to stay, attuned to what Roy was trying to share. So I'm sure Mr. Black was the same way.
Yeah. Plus, as they get older, I suppose their memory wanes a little bit. And so they have their pet stories and their teaching stories. Like you say, there's something that they're trying to get across to you.
Right.
And so they just tell those again and again.
Yeah.
They might alter them a little bit, based on their perception at the time, but basically the same stories.
Well, as a teacher, I'm sure you know this too, that sometimes you just forget who you've told the stories to. And so you just tell them again.
Well, plus in your spiritual life, when you're teaching or talking to newer people or students, they kind of want to hear the amazing things, but as you go further on your path, you begin to realize everything's amazing, but not everybody sees it that way.
That's a great quote, actually. Yes.
So I have a real good friend of mine that lives in Sacramento now, and he and I are working on these audios, cleaning them up. Uh-huh. We have the software, and we talk every Thursday. Later today, and we were on the staff together. I was on staff at the retreat from 72 to 75, and he was there with me. He was from Chicago. And so we have this great friendship, and he looks at Yogacharya as his guru as I do. And we have this one story that we share together that's really, it's a funny story. I won't tell it to you because there's some off-color things.
Okay, you can tell me later.
Do people wouldn't appreciate. But it's funny. We remember, we just talked about this 2 weeks ago. We remember the basics of the story, but some of the details, we don't remember them the same.
Right.
And we both had the same experience. And like he said, there was these two people involved in this experience, and I don't remember them being there at all.
Right.
I'm sure he's right, but I don't remember that.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So of the letters, do you have any favorite letters within the book?
Well, my favorite, because it helps me to justify what I do,
Okay.
is one of the last ones from May 11th, 1951.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't that long before Yogananda passed.
Right.
I'm going to have to turn this light on. Hold on.
Okay.
And he says, "Dear one," Yogacharya must have visited him just before this. He says, "Your coming was a memorable occasion, for I felt that you caught the spirit of the work which the masters and God are guiding. I cannot tell you how I feel about it. When a devotee works for God with the same interest as a husband works for his wife and children, then God is pleased to the utmost. Families are imposed upon us, but God's family is chosen according to our own soul's discretion. That is why Jesus intimated, 'Who is my father, mother, brother, sister, but who loves God?' Our human relationships, unless spiritual, are forgotten in the future and become meaningless. Our divine relationship with our families or divine families become immortal. That is why no one's love is real unless it is spiritual. Only by loving God we can love others with his love in an interesting spiritual way." And then he makes some personal observations. He says, "I'm happy that you like the SRF Lake Shrine and that you tuned in with Stanley. I see all these contacts reflected in your recent efforts to spread the cause in Detroit. So it is good not to stay away too long from the Mother Center. I see that your promise to me for enhancing the work in 2 years has quickened. From now on, and you did not want wait for the 2 years. Of course, it is less than 2 years now. Are you smiling?" He says, "The Detroit Center looks like the Taj Mahal. And I'm pleased that you chose such a place for the center." He's speaking to the Detroit Institute of Arts. "The main center should be in a centrally located place like this, but the retreat should be away from the heart of the city, on the outskirt of the city," the yogis say. "In this transitory convasary of life created by God, it is so wonderful to find brother souls like you who are willing to work for God and thus find the meaning of life and abide in his wishes, ultimately enter into him. Others who come to fulfill their desires have to roam on, encountering endless suffering, such is the law of God. I was very glad to receive the Detroit Center announcements and to see that everything is being patterned according to the organization. The leaflet is brilliant and the subjects selected by you are very well chosen. Please make more ministers like yourself." That's the phrase that I always hold dear. That, of course, he couldn't do that because after his passing, Yogananda's, the monastics took over and they wouldn't have allowed him to make SRF ministers. But I always take heart from that phrase there that Yogananda really told him to make ministers.
Yeah.
He said, they will come and we will help build a new world. Even though its growth may be slow, SRF is marching on. Detroit, being in the center of the United States, is a great opportunity to draw true seekers, both from the East and the West. I would like no better than you to carry out a sub-headquarters there. With your organizational power, you can do something much greater, much more lasting, and much easier, and much more secure than the present-day business organization in which one works to pay taxes, ruining his health and happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Please remember me to Mrs. Black. I enjoyed having you to dinner in my room so much. I hope you won't stay away so long this time. These days are precious days for all of us. We are planning another convocation this summer, which you will hear about soon. I am now at my desert retreat for some time. All my love and blessings to you. Very sincerely yours, with all my love, unendingly, Paramahansa Yogananda. P.S. You have much pleased me, and with me the gurus, Christ, God, whoever manifests through me. Regards to Mrs. Oliver again. It's interesting. He still had his business going then, but it was close to the end of his business because Yogananda told him, he said, you're either going to have to give that up or it's going to be taken away from you. You're going to be forced to. And what ended up happening is he had his stock of his company listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and some kind of underhanded dealings from Wall Street types in New York connived a way to get 51% of the stock and booted him out.
Oh, what year? What year?
I think
so was that around the same year this letter was written, or was that later on?
It was just right around this time period. I don't know if it was 51 or 52.
Yeah,
but it happened before Yogananda passed, so Yogananda made some comment about it.
Yeah. That really is a beautiful letter. Halfway through, I think I teared up a little bit just listening to you read it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And I'm very emotional today. My mother died yesterday, so
I'm sorry.
in this emotional state.
Yeah,
but she had a long life. She was 97, and she wasn't doing very well the last few weeks. So she died peacefully in her sleep. So it was good.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm sure she's being greeted by Yogananda.
Well, I hope so. She wasn't into that, but she was a good Catholic.
Yes. Yeah, just a quick story about Roy. A year or two when I first started going down to visit with him, there was a woman on the retreat who hadn't really learned a whole lot about Kriya Yoga yet, and she asked who the pictures were up on the altar. And at that time, Jesus was right in the middle. And me being young and kind of sarcastic, after she asked that question, I said, well, who's the guy in the middle? Which was Jesus. And Roy said, well, a good Catholic boy like you should know his hero, which I thought was funny because I didn't know he knew that I was Catholic. So it was a funny.
I didn't know you were Catholic either.
Well, you can't tell by looking at me, but yeah.
It's a funny thing, based on, I was raised Catholic, and I would say from a Catholic standpoint, I was a pretty good Catholic till I went to college and started to learn about more things. And then I got into Edgar Casey, and then finally read the autobiography of a yogi and met Yogacharya. And even today, if someone asked me, are you still Catholic? I would say, yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah.
Well, from yoga, you know more about Christianity than most Christians, especially most Catholics.
Yeah. And my grandmother, she was always on to me about that, but she always decided that since I was raised Catholic and I was baptized, I'm okay.
You're okay. You're going to heaven.
Yeah, I'm okay. Well, I'll go somewhere, but anyway, yeah. Yeah, that's a
I
beautiful
didn't know
letter.
Roy had Jesus on his altar. He didn't when I went, and I always, from reading his books, um, what was his autobiography called?
Paramahansa Yogananda's I Knew Him. Was that the
No,
one?
the one he had an autobiography.
I know which one you're talking about, and I can
Yeah,
see it in my mind, but I can't remember.
it had a blue cover.
Yeah,
I always liked it because he mentioned Yogacharya in it. But I guess he was raised in a pretty strict Baptist family. So I always got the impression he wasn't really enamored with Christianity because
well,
of that.
it might be that, but here's my experience of it. That picture was up on the altar, I think maybe until 2008 or 2009, somewhere around there, and then he took it down, and I believe some individuals became very upset with him by doing that, and I didn't matter to me because I was coming to learn yoga, not necessarily more about Jesus, and he said, "Well, we're at a place now in the world where we can just talk about yoga. We don't have to bridge a gap between Christianity to yoga." So in so many words, he was kind of intimating that that's why he took it down, because he felt that now we can just talk about yoga and we don't have to make that connection unless we want to, unless it's part of our
Yeah,
tradition or part of our religion or so
yeah.
on.
I
Yeah.
think he's probably right about that, really.
Yeah.
However, he's still, you know, there's been so many big changes, but still they say 80% of the United States still considers themselves Christian.
Right.
And I've had people come, we just follow we change it a little bit from the SRF. I don't like the way they mix up the pictures. We just put it in a straight line.
Right. Right.
But we include Krishna and Jesus. And we had a couple of people say they would have probably not come back if we hadn't had Jesus on the altar.
Right. Well,
Yeah,
it goes both ways, because
yeah, it
some
does.
people don't want to come because they're trying, they're looking for other ways of kind of relating to God, and they've had some
Yeah, yeah,
difficulties
you're
with
right.
the tradition.
Yeah.
So
Well, you know what? You can't please all the people all the time.
no, that's true. That's true. Yeah. So you mentioned with that letter that you just read that was very affirming for you. Do you mind maybe saying a little bit more about that?
Well, I mentioned a little bit that Yogananda said that in that letter,
Uh-huh.
and the SRF actually let us publish that. So he never really did that
Mhm.
because it wasn't long after that Yogananda died, and James Lynn became the next president. He might have allowed it because he
Right.
was a householder himself. But after James Lynn passed, the monastics took over, which I'm not criticizing. I don't,
Yeah.
doesn't bother me any. It's just they weren't, he would have never been allowed to um, make ministers and have them give Kriya if
Right.
he wanted to stay in good graces with Self-Realization Fellowship,
I see.
because every time that had been tried, it didn't work.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
would kind of shun them.
Right.
Happened with Roy, happened with Kriyananda, happened, what's her name, Mildred something in Seattle.
Hmm. Hmm.
She was a Yogacharya, and she started her own organization, and SRF kind of defrocked her, you might say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was affirming to me because I felt I had some of my own work to do.
Right.
And um, the fact that Yogananda told him to do that meant that we had a place to do that. But
Right.
we had to I'm a little bit of a rule follower,
Uh-huh.
so I don't like to cast off tradition.
Right.
I think it's important.
Yeah.
And so that's why I had someone like Roy Davis, who was already, a minister and qualified pass that down. So it wasn't just me going out saying, oh, after the fact, Yogacharya made me a minister, when he never did during his lifetime.
Right. And you knew him from 72 until he passed in 1989?
I did.
Yeah.
I didn't see him much his last 3 years of life. I was like 23, I think, when I met him.
Mm-hmm.
I was just out of college. It was like I was protected. I had to go to college for some reason, because if I hadn't, I met him before, and maybe I wouldn't have went.
Right.
I had some good friends that my age that didn't go to college because they met Yogacharya and they got really into yoga right away.
Oh, really? Okay.
So when I graduated, it was interesting, right? Like almost the day I graduated, two good friends of mine gave me the autobiography of the yogi. And I read it, and I was I graduated in December, so it was Christmas time. I had time on my hands. I didn't have a job yet. So I read the whole thing in a couple of weeks, and I was just enamored with it. And I sent off for the lessons right away because I wanted to get Kriya Yoga initiation.
Mm-hmm.
And I started getting the lessons. I was pretty much by myself, though. I didn't know anyone else who meditated. I didn't really know anyone else into yoga. And Detroit was, a big city, major, and we used to have a lot of spiritual yogis come through town, give lectures and that kind of thing. But I had the friend who gave me the book. He was in Kalamazoo. I went to Western Michigan in Kalamazoo, and he said, "I'm coming into town. I heard there's an SRF group that meets in meditation on Sundays. Do you want to go?" I said, "Yeah, sure. I don't know any. I like to meditate with someone who meditates."
Yeah.
So he came into town, and we were hippies back then. This was back in the early 70s.
Uh-huh.
And we went downtown, and his service would start at 11 o'clock in the Art Institute. And we were late, as a good hippie should be, And we walked in the auditorium. He would turn the lights down during meditation, and there were no outside windows, so it was dark. And he would just have the light. He would be on stage, and the light would shine on him. And he would talk through almost the whole meditation. Very, very little real silent time. People would ask him about that later, and he said, well, when he moved up to the retreat, that changed, but in Detroit, he did it that way. He said, the fact is we get a lot of new people, and even some of the experienced people can't really meditate for more than a few minutes.
Right.
Yeah. So I try to encourage them he would quote from the Bible, from the Gita. He almost had the whole 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita memorized. And he would quote from that to try to inspire people to continue to meditate. And so we went in, it was dark, and it was crowded. And so it took us a while to find a place to sit. We finally sat down. And then when it was over, we left. We didn't know anybody, we just left. And my friend said, I remember we laugh about it because he became his disciple also. We laugh now. He said to me, who was that old guy on stage, and why didn't he shut up? Didn't he know we were trying to meditate? Well, then he left, and I just started going down there every Sunday because I didn't have anything else to do.
Yeah.
And about the 3rd time I went, this woman from Chicago, who I know, she's deceased now, but I became good friends with. She grabbed me by the elbow and she said, "Why don't you come downstairs with us? We have this fellowship." And I said, "Sure, why not?" So we go down there, and I didn't know what to expect, and all these people, and Yogacharya was sitting at a table, and all these people are on the other side of the table, and he's, giving discourses and laughing. He was the funniest person I ever met.
Yeah.
And she took me down there, and she put a folding chair out off the back of his right shoulder. And I sat down, and when I sat down, he was telling a story about an experience he had with Yogacharya or with Yogananda and James Lynn and Dr. Lewis. And I sat down and I listened to him, and I thought, holy smokes, this guy knew Yogananda.
You
And
didn't
he
know
turned
until then.
around and he looked at me in my eyes, and I went, "Oh, I found my guru."
Yeah. Yeah.
It was, I think of it now, it's still quite thrilling. It gives me chills.
Yeah. I can feel it. Yeah. So you didn't
But
know he was a student of Yogananda's until that moment.
no, I didn't.
Yeah.
I never heard of him before. And so then once that happened, and I realized what was going on with him and me, then I wiggled myself in so I would go early.
Mhm.
And he had a group of people. They had classes early. They had a hatha class. He would do a Kriya review class on the technique, and he'd have somebody else do a lesson class. And then he would, he always he used to write his own lessons, but once SRF came out with their Sunday services, he just read those.
Yeah.
And he would practice, which he didn't really need, but he did it. He'd take this guy and he'd read it to him to see he was all right. And then he would come and sit behind the curtain on the stage. And I would help with the lights and the sound system. So I get there early. And then the fellow's name was Bob Green. He's deceased now too. He would take a chair. Mr. Black would sit behind the computer for 20 minutes to a half hour before the service, meditating. And Bob would get a chair and he'd put it up behind Mr. Black. He'd say, "Go meditate with him. Go meditate with him." So I get to sit these 4 services behind him and meditate with him.
Yeah. That's
It's
great.
terrific.
Yeah.
And then I wiggled my way into, I wanted to go, you read the autobiography and you want to have that experience like Yogananda had
Right.
with his guru. And so I wanted to get up to the retreat because he'd opened it in 1970. And so after my first Kriya initiation, which he did annually in June, and then he closed down the Sunday services and he would go stay at the retreat for the whole summer.
Mhm.
And so before he left, I got up the courage and I asked him if I could come and be on the staff. And he said, "Well, what can you do?" I kind of, I'm a college, I didn't know how to do anything.
Right.
And I said, "Well, whatever you need." And he says, "Well, we have enough of those kinds." And so he turned me down. And then he was gone for the summer. I went up one weekend, the 4th of July weekend, but I had to work and, try to pay my rent and buy food. So I didn't see him again much until he came back after Labor Day. He started up the services at the Art Institute again. And then I was back in my routine. I would help with the lights and sound system. And I kind of got the hint from him what I needed to do to get up there. So during the summer, I took a correspondence course to become an electrician.
Oh, okay.
And so when he came back in the fall, I was kind of prepared. So I asked him again, and he said, "Well, what can you do?" And I said, "Well, I was taking this class to become an electrician." And he interrupted me. He said, "When can you come?" And I had some affairs to clean up. So I went up there on Christmas Day, 1972.
Wow.
And I didn't know how to be an electrician, but you know what? I learned while I was there.
Yeah. And you didn't electrocute yourself or others in the meantime.
And I became the licensed electrician.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So he was a businessman, and I would take from that he was probably very purposeful in how he thought you should approach your life in yoga.
It was very practical. I have to say, I mean, I had a great father. He died kind of young, but he provided for the family, he worked hard. He had a trade. He was a tool maker in the automotive industry, but he wasn't the example. He was an example for me, good one too, but not like Yogacharya. I looked at him as my spiritual father. And I will say that he actually taught me how to be a man and a spiritual man. So I learned my lessons, and I wasn't inspired to be a monastic. I know when I was Catholic, I thought about becoming a priest for about 2 seconds. And I knew that I wanted to be married and have a family.
Yeah.
And even though I got seriously into yoga, I still knew that that was my path, and he was my example.
Right.
You know, I honor Yogananda. He's my Param Guru. He was unbelievable,
Mhm.
but I didn't have the inclination to be a monastic. In fact, I think most people don't actually.
Right.
And when you try to put a square peg in a round hole, you have problems.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
So just out of curiosity, um, when you said he taught you to be like a spiritual man, sometimes when we work with people, there's an idea of what it means to be spiritual, and sometimes it seems a little loose or a little undisciplined. So I'm kind of curious if you could just maybe say a little bit more about what that term means to you, or what does it mean in general for someone to be maybe spiritually mature? Maybe that's a good way of looking at it.
I'm going to preface this by something I see in some of the younger people that come onto the path, particularly up there, and they get involved with the retreat. Is a lot of them, and I think this was even true when I was a young man. You think, oh, I'm just going to be spiritual, and you forget about the practical side of life, and you just become kind of a lazy person, and you don't do your dharma, as the Hindus call it.
Yeah.
That's a big deal as a yogi.
Yeah.
And most of us aren't have the temperament like Yogananda did, where we can meditate 4 or 5 hours a day. We're just not going to do it.
Right.
And so you have to have something constructive to fill your time. And if you're a householder, if you have a wife and family, it is really your duty well, today women work a lot, but your duty to at least partially provide for the family.
Mhm.
You have to live in the world. You're
Right.
not a monastic. You don't have a begging bowl. That's
Right.
kind of frowned upon in our society. So, and he said, if you're a young man back when I was at, and it wasn't as common for women to work outside the home. It still happened. My mother did it, but it wasn't as common as it is today.
Yeah.
And so he would say, and it wasn't common in Yogacharya's world at all when he was raised, he said, well, you got to get a skill. You got to have something where you can provide a decent living for yourself and your family.
Right.
And he taught me to do that and have a balanced life. That was his biggest example to me.
Mhm.
Is, here was this unbelievably busy businessman. At one point, he said he had 1,500 employees working for him.
Wow.
And think of the pressures of that and on your time, but
Mhm.
yet he found time to meditate, his Kriya techniques, and become really one of the great yogis of his time.
Yeah.
That's what he taught me, and I think that's lacking in some of the younger yogis today. They don't have a lot of common sense sometimes.
Mhm.
Common sense isn't that common.
Right. Yeah.
I found Roy to be that way too.
Yeah.
I found that really common between Roy and Yogacharya.
Yeah.
He wasn't some pie in the sky type of yogi. He was really down to earth, but yet he had that. When you're around him, they had that sense of the power and the realization that they had. But
Right.
they were down to earth people.
Right.
They fit into any setting that you could imagine. They would
Yeah.
fit in.
Yeah.
So that's what I try to do in my life, and that's what I try to pass on to the people that I'm, teaching and training. That you got to have a balanced life. I don't know anyone in America that's going to meditate 5 or 6 hours a day. They don't have them into it. They're
Right.
going to become lazy, and they're going to get in trouble. They're going to
Right.
develop bad habits.
Well, it's
So
not even that.
that's
They might be able to sit for long periods of time, but even then, are they actually engaged in the process?
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because in the beginning, it's mentally tough.
Hmm.
Later on, it becomes easier, but in the beginning, it isn't easy.
Right.
And it's mentally tough, and it wears your mind out a little bit if you do more than you're capable. And
Absolutely.
then you go down roads you don't want to go down.
Right. Yes. Absolutely.
But if you can balance it, and Yogananda's writings are full of that too. Actively calm, calmly active. You got to balance them out. And unless you're a great yogi that's developed in past lives, you just don't have the capability to do it anyway.
Right. And that's why we're here. That's why we're trying to cultivate that and build up to it, so it's effective.
And like Yogananda would say, Yogacharya would say that, I'm sure Ray would say too, that your meditation helps you in your work and your work helps you in your meditation.
Yeah.
And Yogacharya was so big on work. When I was on the staff, we worked all the time. Yeah. We always had our evening meditation for an hour together. Right. And then he would expect us to meditate before bed and as we got up in the morning. And but the rest of the day we were working.
Yeah.
And what he would say is you have, when you're working, you have to put your whole mind into your work. And then it helps your meditation because you develop your concentration.
Mm-hmm.
I know the last project I did there, I was having a hard time with this. I couldn't get this done. And I kind of was at my wit's end. So I after breakfast this morning, I got on the front porch of the main house where we eat and have meals, the kitchen. And I said to him, I said, I started to say, I started to explain this, and I said, and I didn't think, and I was going to add something to that, like I didn't think this was going to happen. And he interrupted me. He said, "That's the problem. You didn't think." Another time I was in the basement, I was changing a electric panel with old fuses, and I changed it to circuit breakers. And I was almost done. I was neatening it up, and I was looking at it. And it was in the basement of the main house, and he kind of snuck up behind me. I didn't know that he was there. And he said something to me and kind of startled me. And he said, well, your concentration on your task was good, but he said you still have to be aware of your surroundings.
Yeah. That's very good.
It was a good teaching thing for me.
Yeah, that's great.
I'll tell you one more story. This is one of my favorite things because it says so much about who he was. He used to dislike trespassers. We have 800 acres.
Right.
And the main road into the house is about 1.25 miles long. And we used to get a lot of trespassers, and it wasn't even developed as much then as it is now. And they'd come in undetected till they get to the river and the main house, and he would have us throw them out. Mm-hmm. He said he's trying to establish a vibration there, and they would start to ruin the vibration a little bit. And then it was like he was teaching us to be men again. So he would have us throw them out after a while. First, he did it all. Uh-huh. And that's one time he was on the front porch again, and this trespasser was there. And he was just yelling at this guy, reaming him out. And I'm standing behind him off his left shoulder. And I'm watching him. I'm going, well, isn't this interesting? And he turned around at me and he winked and smiled. And he went right back at that guy. Oh my God. Think of the inner control he must have to do that. Yeah. Where at 1 second, he's just yelling at this guy and giving him the business. He turns, and next second he winks and smiles at me, and then he goes right back at him. Wow.
Well, I think that's pretty clear that he was demonstrating, that maybe he really wasn't angry. He was just trying to get his point across.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. He wasn't attached to any of it.
Absolutely.
He was just doing what he needed to do at the moment.
Yeah.
Without attachment. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
At least that's what I took away from it.
Yeah. That's good. Good. Well,
I still can't quite do that, but I'm getting closer.
Yeah. Well, we're coming close to the end of our time together, and I've really enjoyed talking to you again. I mean, I feel like we should have stayed in touch more than just every 5 years.
Yeah.
So, but before we finish up, though, do you have any final letters you'd like to read to us? Or
What would you like? Let me give you in the table of contents, they give you a little preview. Let's see here.
anyone that you might think would be maybe a good closing sentiment if there's a letter like that?
Here's one from September 23rd, 42. The byline, we'll see if it relates. It says, meditate deeply each day and mentally dedicate your life to God.
Mm.
That might be a good one.
Yeah.
They're all good, really. You know, Yogananda was so full of, God that everything was good.
Absolutely. I'm failing one of my yamas and niyamas by coveting the book.
I wish I was going to see it for some of my students. I was going to try to make copies because they didn't get them either.
Yeah.
A couple of them did, and it's so hard to. And
Yeah.
I don't want to ruin the book.
Well,
but it's hard to copy.
We are also planning on possibly coming up to Song Memorial Ranch sometime next year. So maybe I can look at it if you're around.
Yeah, that's good. I'll just read this one so you can close.
Okay.
Dear J. Oliver Black, dear one, please forgive me for not writing to you sooner. I have been extremely busy every day working at the new church on Sunset. That's a Hollywood temple.
Mm-hmm.
I am now giving classes there each Sunday evening, and next week we will have the initiation. I wish you were here now. It was very thoughtful and generous of you to send a contribution to be used for the first service in the new church. What you have given has been applied against outstanding bills, so now you must feel that you have helped in the building of this beautiful church of all religions. I'm so anxious to have you see it and wonder when you will come again.
Mm-hmm.
It would be wonderful if you could come around Christmas holidays. Mr. Lin is here for a few days. I have given him your message and he was deeply pleased. He too hopes to meet with you for meditation and discussion. I am sending you a copy of the physical exercise instructions, which I promised you when you were here. It makes me so happy to know that you are faithfully working toward your own spiritual, mental, and physical perfection. Meditate deeply and each day mentally dedicate your life to God. Greatest peace and happiness comes to him who lives to please God above all lesser duties. With unceasing blessings and love, I'm very, very sincerely yours, P. Yogananda. This is interesting too. At this point now, you know how the person who types the letter puts it says PY:FW, Faye Wright.
Oh,
Type this out.
Yeah.
Dear one, when will you be here again? The new church inside is most beautiful. Sometime you must see. Please write often and continue your tuning in with me, stronger and stronger. Deepest love, ever yours, PY. They're all kind of like that, though.
Yeah.
At the end, though, it gets more. There was this connection with those, particularly those four, and some of the nuns too. But they had this connection, and it was so deep, you could just feel it in the letters, and to hear Yogacharya talk about it, like you say, it kind of chokes you up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The love of the guru for the disciple and then reciprocated. It's such a indescribable thing, isn't it?
Yes, yes. I mean, even just hearing you talk about Mr. Black, I can feel it all the way across the internet.
And I can feel you with your feelings for Roy. I
Yeah,
mean, it's so obvious, you know.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they're not the same, but they're the same.
Yeah, and I mean that is an interesting. Not I know we talked about closing up here, but I think that's an interesting thing what you just talked about, because we have relationships with our spouses and with our family and with our friends, and we have a relationship with a spiritual teacher, guru, spiritual mentor, and when that is clear, there's just something about that, like you said, it's indescribable. And even and you might experience this too, when I think back about spending time with Mr. Davis, I just remember, sitting in the chalet with him, drinking tea, or just being beside him. Like even bringing up just those memories alone brings that same kind of presence into the space, and that is something.
And it makes you know that he's still with you.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah,
that can happen.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here today. It was really a treat
I want
to
to thank
speak with
you. I
you.
had a good time with you. You're wonderful.
Yeah. Well, you too. And we'll close up here, but don't log off just yet. I'll just stop the recording, and then we can chat just for a moment or two longer if you've got time.
You're okay. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much.